Maria Shanpla Williams Yuhat Duasak, Yale na Hatsati, Deshitan na Hatsati, Decluwedi Yeti Hatsati, Atlain Kwana Yahat, Anchorage and Carcross Tagish First Nations Ayahat. My name is Maria Williams, and I am Raven of the Deshitan clan and a child of the killer whale. I am of the Big Lake people, the Atlain Kwan, and from Anchorage and of the Carcross Tagish First Nations people, so inland Tlingit. My father was Aweach Bill Williams, was Decluwedi, and my mother, Sneach Marilyn Williams, Dlateclaw, and Blackfoot, who was adopted by the Deshitan people of Carcross Tagish First Nations, Gunalchish Deshitan. Gunalchish, and thank you for allowing me to speak here, people of Sitka, and our conference organizers, Steve Henriksen and Andy Hope III. Hi, I am very deeply honored to be in your homeland and to be here with such esteemed colleagues. Indeed, I'm very humbled. My main area of research and my greatest passion in life is Indigenous music and dance practices. In my presentation today, I wish to share with you what I have come to learn and observe about Alaska Native music and dance in general, and more specifically music of and dance of southeastern Alaska. First, I wish to tell you a little bit about me so you can understand my perspectives. I was born and raised in Anchorage. My father was a fluent Tlingit speaker and traditional hunter and trapper. He was a veteran of World War II and a longtime cook at the Alaska Native Medical Center in Anchorage. Most of my knowledge comes from him and my other relatives from Atlin and Carcross. I currently teach at the University of New Mexico and am living among 22 indigenous nations there. I am learning from them and their experiences, which in many ways mirror ours, but there are some significant differences. I conducted a lot of research on Tlingit music, primarily from the 18th and 19th century cultural context, the time preceding the great colonizing efforts of the Russians and Americans. Music during the pre-contact times was inseparable from the clan-based social structure. Each clan house had their own repertoire of music and dance and associated performance protocols, regalia, and styles. I've also done a lot of research more recently on the Renaissance in Alaska Native music and dance, which began in the 1970s and continues today. In order to understand the Renaissance, we must examine the colonial periods. From the vantage point, from this vantage point, we can see how music and dance practices have changed and adopted to the 21st century geopolitical arena that we live in today. The initial period begins in the mid-1700s with the discovery of the Aleutian Islands and the subsequent fur rush. Furs were the global market commodity during this time period, similar to what oil is today. Initial Russian expansion came into this area, and the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian had to establish relationships with them. There were battles and wars and exchange during this period, as we are all very familiar with. After 1867 and the early American period, we as indigenous people were forced to deal with a completely different colonizing entity, a new colonial language, English, arrival of missionaries, and by the 1900s, substantial loss of our traditional homelands with the establishment of the 1907 Tongass National Forest and 1925 Glacier Bay National Monument. This, combined with epidemic diseases and the establishment of Western-based educational practices such as boarding school, witnessed a period of time that was quite painful. My father went to the Chutchutla Indian School in Carcross, and this is actually a photograph from the Yukon Historical Societies of the Chutchutla Indian School, which was run by the Anglican Church. Half the children died. He himself was punished for speaking the only language he knew at the time, Tlingit. He saw terrible abuse happen to his fellow students because they were part of the name of this policy, Kill the Indian, Save the Child. And it was a government-sanctioned educational program. He was there for 4 years. He said he never learned English there, only shame. He said he finally learned English when he was a veteran. He actually was in World War II. He was a veteran of World War II, and he said there he finally learned English fluently. The epidemic diseases, Christian missionaries, the boarding school, loss of the majority of the land base dealt a significant blow to the traditional clan-based cultures, religions, and shamanism, as well as language retention and, of course, music and dance practices. I want to talk a little bit about the missionaries since I think they left such a huge footprint here. There's a little-known historic event that took place in 1874 in New York City that has repercussions even today. The Comedy Agreement divided Alaska into a denominational missionary pie. The denominations met, and they basically did divide Alaska into a pie. The Presbyterians were assigned southeastern Alaska since there were already missionaries here. The North Slope, the Quakers got the Kooeex area, the Moravians got southwestern Alaska, the Baptists were assigned Kodiak Island, etc. We are still dealing with the policies set forth by the Colony Agreement. For example, when the Quakers came to the Kooeex area, and the Quakers, of course, very strict English-only policies, and Quakers did not tolerate dance at all, and they did not believe in any form of dancing. And of the 11 villages in the Kooeex area, even today there is still only one dance group, to my knowledge, the Kotzebue Northern Lights Dancers. But for example, if you look at the Moravians that came to southwestern Alaska, the heart of the Yukon-Kuskokwim area, and they established Bethel, of course, and they actually believed that they needed to learn the Yupik, the Central Yupik language, and they developed a written orthography. And today, in those villages that were missionized by the Moravians, they have a very high level of language retention. During the Renaissance in traditional music and dance of the 1970s and 80s, it was the Moravian villages that began to produce a lot of new song composition, simply because the language retention had remained high. Again, a result of that particular, the actual effect of those missionaries that came to that region. By the 1960s, the Native people of Alaska began to work together for the very first time in history to address their indigenous land claims. This led, of course, to the 1971 Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, a social engineering project that had it as its goal to transform indigenous subsistence-based cultures into corporate land and resource exploiters. One of the ironies behind ANCS is that music and dance became staples at every political gathering, from the Alaska Federation of Natives to regional meetings, and then gatherings such as the Festival of Native Arts, to the reestablishment of other types of dance festivals. By the 1980s, really a dance renaissance was here. Celebrations started during this time period in 1982, as did the Chamai Festival in Bethel, the Kiviak and Barrow, Athabascan Fiddling Festival, and many others. Young people were and are initially drawn to dance and sing. Today, many, many dance groups now exist, which is very exciting. For just a few decades or two earlier, there were just a handful. The important question about the Renaissance in traditional dance and music is, do we dance and sing like we did in the 19th century? Has the cultural context changed? After all, we are the children of the survivors, those that fought for our land, our human rights, and our cultural legacy. So what has survived these major colonial periods? When I moved to New Mexico in 1993 to teach at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and then later at the University of New Mexico, I had an epiphany. The tribes in the Southwest, the Navajo, the Apache, and the 19 Rio Grande Pueblos, have their traditional religions and their sacred repertoires completely intact. I think that what was most profound to me was their traditional religions. Why are their religions intact, while in Alaska, our traditional religions have not really survived the two major colonial periods? So it's a very deep and painful question with very deep and painful answers. I did research on the effects of the epidemic diseases, which wiped out entire villages, oftentimes 50% of a village. Sometimes entire clan houses disappeared. For the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian people, whose music and dance repertoire were clan-based and clan-owned, this had dire consequences. The music repertoires began to shrink. The music of the shaman, often referred to as yake songs, also began to disappear due to the diseases, pressures from the missionaries and the United States government, as traditional religious practices were outlawed until the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978. As Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian people began to abandon their clan houses, this brought about gradual changes in how clan songs and dances were brought out, how they were performed, and when they were performed. The 20th century witnessed the great amount of change. Today, most dance groups are a combination of moieties, clans, and houses, where, if you go back 100 years or more, each clan in each house would have their own repertoire. Each house would have a particular dance style. They'd have regalia. They'd have specific songs for their clan hats. And of course now it's so exciting to see all these wonderful dancers, as we saw last night, But when we see the dance group, it's very rare that we'll see the eagle side and the raven side, or we'll see, each of the houses, of course, with their own specific repertoire. It's very rare that you see that anymore. So that's, of course, been a huge change. The repertoires are often not delineated in terms of what clan officially owns them and the associated protocols. The atu, the ceremonial hats, and other highly clan-related cultural patrimony in some villages have maintained the repertoires of songs associated with them. Each clan hat, for example, had its own repertoire of songs that can only be performed when that hat is brought out. As cultural patrimony began to disappear, such as the clan hats due to the collection frenzy for Northwest Coast art, those repertoires became lost because these items were removed. By the time these items were oftentimes repatriated back to those clans or the houses, the people who knew the repertoire associated with them had passed on. So again, we're looking at repertoire that is lost. New song composition is another delicate area. Song composition is directly related to the level of language retention in villages. For example, in villages where language retention is 50% or greater, the level of new song composition is very high. We're familiar with going to AFN or WEIO and seeing Inupiat groups or Yupik groups bringing out new songs every year. These are primarily, of course, social songs, I would like to point out, but they are still new song compositions. Today, there are only a handful of Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian song composers, and we need to address this and also more fully document the clan songs that have survived. The special songs associated with the atu, the clan origin or migration songs, are particularly vital because these are our ceremonial histories. Earlier, I had mentioned how tribes in the southwest of the United States have maintained their religious practices and the associated music and dance repertoire. But this is what has remained of our tradition, and this is why we must hold them most dear. During my research for my master's thesis, I discovered older recordings of primarily Tlingit music, which was my main focus for my thesis. Recordings made by anthropologist Catherine McClellan in 1950 and 52 included many of my father's people songs. The songs were love songs, mourning songs, war songs, and even Yak songs. They were mostly Deshitan, Dekluwadi, and Yanyedi. My father helped me translate them, texts of the songs, often accompanied me when I interviewed people, and I must thank the many people that helped me during this time. Catherine McClellan, of course, Walter Soboloff, David Katzik, Anna Katzik, Elizabeth Nyman Williams, Johnny Jack. These individuals are so helpful and generous with their time during that when I was doing a lot of my early research. The songs are performed by individuals such as Ann Geddes, Edgar Sidney, and others, and I actually have one of her recordings, which I'll play in a moment. In conclusion, I hope to see more new song compositions. What I'm showing in the back, of course, is this renaissance that's occurred. Photos from World Eskimo Indian Olympics, Little Walrus Dancer from King Island. This is the Kotzebue Northern Lights Dancers, where you see the transmission from the elder Alvi Shagaluk to the youth. And of course, our future is our young people, cute little Yupik dancers. This photograph is actually one of the historic photos from the turn of the century from one of the older wolf dances. So in terms of our traditional religious practices, I include the shaman songs or the Yak songs, the songs that are associated with our very valuable clan regalia, our clan origin songs, our migration songs. Those are so important. So the 20th century brought about great change. Dance groups are now combinations of moieties, houses, and clans. Because of that removal in many ways of of our cultural patrimony, we've lost a lot of repertoire. Our language retention, of course, is shrinking. I feel that I'm hoping, and we are seeing more new song composers, which is very exciting. And I think that we also need to look and document more fully our clan songs that have survived, and understand their lineage in many ways, and when they can be brought out, and those associated protocols. You can locate historic recordings. There are actually a number of historic recordings. You can listen to other similar Northwest Coast groups, because in many ways a lot of the other Northwest Coast groups have a similar style, or at least the cultural context might be the same. Looking at the accounts of visitors and even missionaries, they often describe the music and dance, the regalia. Also look at artist portraits because they often include beautifully detailed regalia, the face painting. Oh, I love looking at really old portraits. And that's one thing I'm beginning to see with some of the Tlingit groups. I'm seeing some of the face painting coming back, which is, I think, very exciting. There's a lot of people I know that have historic recordings. They've made recordings their whole life. They're probably sitting in a shoebox somewhere. Find out in your community who has those because those are so valuable. I'm just showing a couple images, of course, because I think clan conferences such as this one and, of course, the one that occurred are so important because this gives us an opportunity to not only share our knowledge but also share our concerns. So I want to say maybe I'll play one little recording just from Catherine McClellan. I think I saw Doris McLean come in. So, hi Doris. This is my cousin from Carcross. This might sound familiar to you.
The Deshitans, children.
I'm going to go ahead and stop it there in the interest of time. But what was very valuable about these recordings, and especially working with my father at the time, and at the time Elizabeth Nyman was still alive, Johnny Jack was still alive, Angela Sidney was still alive. And these individuals were so helpful in terms of giving the cultural context of the information, because in our society, music just does not stand on its own. Music comes from a certain clan. It's written for a certain clan. There's a lot of associated protocols, even with love songs. Like this was basically a love song. And I learned a lot. I learned that it's very rare that you would put an individual's name. If you're writing a love song, you always call them the child of. You know, and I especially enjoyed the different difficulties in the song translation. But I will say that some of the love songs I found, some of the words were very, very powerful. You know, I love you so much, I would kill for you. So I thought, hey, that's the Tlingit way. So we can't help it, we're intense people. So in conclusion, I just want to thank everyone, Gunal Shish, for coming. We have I also want to thank our clan conference organizers again, worked so hard on this, Steve Henriksen and Andy Hope III. And our next presenter is going to be Elaine Abraham and Judy Ramos. So just give us 1 second as we transfer from the PowerPoints. And I think we'll take questions at the very end. Okay. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. More music? I have a couple other songs on my iPod. Do you guys want to hear a Yake song? Really? Okay. This is Dr. Jackson's war dance.
This is song number 3 on reel 2 of Yukon 1950-51. Jake Jackson, his wife Mary Jackson, and Mrs. Annie Geddes, Upper Taku Tlingit Indians from Teslin, sing of what they call a war dance, accompanied by a drum. Mr. Jake Jackson gives an introduction in Tlingit.
So are there any questions or? No, well, I could. I just put a couple of samplings on them just to actually prepare me for coming here. So I need the power of the music. So I don't know if Doris has anything to say. Doris McLean is back there, and she, of course, was there when Catherine, you were a child, right? You were just a little kid when Catherine McClellan was making these recordings. And, of course, these are her relatives as well. So.
When Marie's talking about a lot of these recordings in your shoebox, she was referring to me. Because I do have some wonderful tapes that I, just out of curiosity as a young person, I wanted to record our elders, and some of the things they left in the recordings, just talking to me. I picked up some wonderful things. Like once I remember asking an elder, why do you wear bear claws? And he said, for strength. He said, you use your bear claws. He said, when you have to go out, make a speech, or when you have to face difficulty. He said, put on your bear claws. Little things like that, as a young person, I was curious about, and I would ask these questions. And years later, I listened to some of the recordings. I thought, I'm so glad I asked that stupid question, because it became an important one. At the time, I just kind of, and you tend to do this. And I remember talking to Kitty McClellan. She said, always identify yourself on the tape, no matter whether it's just you sitting down, and identify who you're speaking to and where you're at, because that makes your recording legal. And I'm sure Marie can tell you more about that part of it than I could. That's just some of the things. And the other thing is to be careful when you get it recorded, because the reason being is that in Canada, in the Yukon, I was going to record all my stories, but they had a heritage board, and they wanted me to get permission from the elders. That, I said, these elders have passed on. They gave me permission when they asked me to record them. So, it's kind of difficult when you're working with some people on a heritage board, let's say, that don't really understand. And also, the other thing I find we're having difficulties with is that with the elders are people, I'm talking about in the Yukon, so many of them don't really want to leave their stories, and they don't realize this. We need it. We're going to need them as our generations get there. We need the stories from our elders. They have to start thinking about the other generations. And this is what I admire about this conference. We've learned so much. We're so appreciative of the committees and whoever put this together, because, wow, I tell you, we should have all the youth here.
Yeah, I would love to see some of the young dancers last night. The other thing I know Doris has in her recordings is my father had a lot of stories of Todd Latane, who's this very famous Tlingit warrior. He has great stories. And I know some of them myself, but of course, I'm not really a storyteller, but my father told these in great length to Doris because she asked. So there are many of these wonderful recordings that are existing, and I think it's important that we acknowledge that. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now to Elaine Abraham and Judy, and I have your PowerPoint up. So,
I'm going to take the privilege of having to work with Judy, and I'm going to do something that I didn't ask her permission from. She's usually my boss when we do these things. Ish, Yan Ish, would you come up? And David. And Tekwadi, can you come up? This is my dad. He's Tekwadi. He is David. He has my father's name. Yan Ish Tekwadi. Lorraine is Tekwadi. Now Tekwadi that he spoils rotten. Kai, Kusua.
He's helping.
Oh. My father's from Yakutat. He's what do we call drum house Tekwadi. George Tekwadi Techan, you want to join us? During those 1830 epidemics that Marie was talking about, the whole villages, whole houses died out. And my father, those three men I was telling you about, Charlie White, Harry Bremner, and Olaf Abraham, they would be telling these stories, but they would hit on some things that I never understood. It was way after the time where they weren't really around for me to ask questions of, because my father he lived to be 113, but he had a stroke. But in that Tekwadi land where my father came from, on Plain, the land of plenty, their community houses, they died out completely in each house. And the Tlingit humor just kind of got me at that point. They were talking about this rock that was made into a seal oil lamp. And in one of those houses where there was nothing but dead people, was still burning for days in the middle of this clan house where nobody was alive anymore. And if you know clan houses, they're about like this. They're dug down about 4 feet, and in order to take care of the drainage of the water, they've got all of these little drainages. Maybe she can tell us a little more about that engineering, since she studied engineering. it always amazed me, you know, in any place in Southeast, if you dig a little hole, it fills with water. They engineered it to the point that there was no water in this 4 feet down. So when you came into the Potlatch, into their big houses, you went downstairs. There's slaves to this side, and sometimes young men, and you had your yake, your shamans on another side. And then you had your platform, but in the middle they had fires. And after many, many, many days, months, the bodies became iridescent. And there was this weird glow at night in the clan houses. And this is where I just admire our ancestors. What can you do? Ishas, the clan of my fathers. They would say to their warriors, let's see what a good warrior you are. Go down and get that sea lamp among all that dead bodies that are iridescent glowing, that are their relatives. They didn't have the strength to take them out and to bury them. And warrior after warrior would just not get past the door. It was a young man. They always say in Tlingit, for those of you that speak Tlingit here, it would be like my 16-year-old grandson standing there. They have not become into a man yet. That was the one that was able to get that lamp with the seal oil lamp. The reason I'm telling you this story is the real clan of my fathers have died out. And we have a lot of other Tequidi from the different rivers. When the Tequidi came up from the Ketchikan area, from Tangati, the land of the sea lions, they stopped in Sitka and on to Yakutat. They were powerful warriors, and they kind of took. Every time I see the Tequidi come in and dance with their bare hands, I just knew how they were in them days. They were very, very, very warlike. They took and they bought and they settled into the big rivers that are in Yakutat, Lost River, Situk River, and Anklan. My father's people became Gauhitan, the people of the drum house. They're actually no more. The ones that are left are the ones of Sitka and Situk and Lost River. And my father left me this awesome responsibility. My two sisters died. My brother died all of TB, again, another pestilence that came after smallpox and after all the other diseases, measles. Our system was so worn out, we died of TB. So they died of TB, and I was the only one left. And he left me with this awesome responsibility. He said, it's really against Tlingit law for you to stand and tell my stories. But we have a grandfather, Tlingit, my father was Tlingit Yeti. My fathers can give you the permission, the ravens, we're ravens, to talk about that, and that's where Charlie White, Tlingit, Lorraine's Tlingit came in. But when I met, well actually, it was Maka that first fell in love with. She was a little girl when she first met Willie at Tlingit and Haida convention, was it really? And she saw him, she fell in love with him. She pushed Linda, his wife, out of the way and hung on to him all that time. And she's the one that introduced Willie to us, and we adopted him as my father, one of my father's names. Is Yan Yan Ish. I wanted to honor him today, but mostly I wanted to honor his wife Linda. His Ish Dushet, my father's wife that takes care of him. And I wanted to pay her for taking care of my father, the grandfather of my grandchildren that love him so much. Yan Yan Ish. This is Susie Abraham's old bracelet. You don't see them like that anymore. I don't know who made it. I don't know when it was made. But I want you to kiss your wife and give it to her today. With a cheers. Thank you. Anybody want to say anything, or you want to just shake hands? Auntie is instructing niece.
Yan yan ishu hak tu sa. Te kodi ayahat. Kats hit ayahat. Tata kwan hatsite. Klika yatki. Kanakari dachkan. I'm a Willie Nicklin, Yan yan ish. Thanks to my daughter, Shusha. And I just, on behalf of Kansha Wu, my wife, she was adopted by Cyril George as Kansha Wu, Emma Hamburg's name, from Basket Bay, the arched rock house of Deshitan in Angoon. And I thank Shusha for recognizing her. She really is the strength behind me and much of what Tequidi Tongass tribe is trying to do, other than fight each other. And she's working right now, supporting me, making it possible to come up and do things. And I just want to thank Elaine and her entire family. There's 2 owls that live by our house that stand on the deck each night and eat little things and leave little skeletons on the deck. And they're about 2 feet tall. They're white, and they're very unusual for the area. And I think of you and your family never lived there. And I just want to say thank you, Gunashish, I'm playing Gunashish Hoho. And I'd like Mr. Ramos, he told me the other day that there's a Gunashish that's about it's a word for a large, thick mug of hot beverage that you put your hands around when it's cold. And there's no handle to it, so you put your hands around it, and it leaves you warm for a long time, and that's a very special Gunashish for keeping your hands warm and reminding you of the thank you for so long. What is that?
Kooeex.
Koyat. Shish koyat.
A long thank you. It keeps your hands warm when you come in. That's the first thing they give you. It's a big mug type coffee or tea, and it's called Gunashish Kooeex.
You don't have your shirt on. Oh, you have an owl on? Who's got an owl? We belong to the house of the owl, the shaman's house of the Yakutat, now Yakutat, Copper River people. And we're crazy about owls. Don't put any owls near me. I'm going to spend all my permanent money when I see owls. But it's cheers for enduring. and celebrating this with us. I'm going to turn it over to Judy. She does, and I'll introduce her very quickly. Judy is my second daughter. Number one daughter is going over there, that's Charmaine. Judy is my second, and my oldest son is, we call him Kakos. I think I heard some name, it's a Kanaktedi name from, we come from Berry River, which is west of Cordova. We're Iak Atna from Chitna. Thousands of years ago, that was who we were. So that's why you see the very difference in the Yakutat dances. When we came to Yakutat thousands of years ago, there was a female shaman by the name of the Khudzu. And I think Judy tried to get into it in our compressed time the other day with the coming of the Russians in her presentation. She had the two children, Maka and where's Kai? Oh, Kai over here are her children. And we've really concentrated on them. George has really concentrated on Kai into training in the Tlingit ways. And it's not easy, but Judy has really tried to make sure that they follow the traditional ways. Judy was born here in Sitka, and she received a degree in anthropology in Anchorage, and a master's degree at APU. And so she does a lot of this work for me. I have no patience for machines like PowerPoint. I have no patience for computers. I refuse to have emails. If you're going to talk to me, get an old phone. I just refuse to have those things. They're cumbersome. And one of the reasons I refuse those things is we become mechanical. You don't use your memory. Everything that I give from memory. And I don't want to be confused by writing it. People are always asking me for what you wrote, and I don't write it. I make an outline so I can fit it to 10 minutes. And that's about all I do. But Judy has been really helpful. A couple of years ago, she came back from Canada to raise her kids in the village. So that's where now Kai is taking a young leadership. And yesterday, you should have heard us when the Yakutat outsong dance and songs started. You just hear that echo coming in from outside. Maka has been trained to do that, but she had this little voice. We couldn't hear her when she was at the outside song. We couldn't hear her. Her auntie over there that was instructing her even bought her a video on how to throw your voice. She's still, and yesterday as I sat there, I didn't know she had graduated to that point. I've been living in Anchorage for 3 months. Her voice had volume, and it came out loud and clear, so we were very happy that she could do that. But that's the work of a mother and a family. It's really hard to raise your Tlingit kids Tlingit way by yourself. You need that community. So in that way, I'm introducing Judy, who will probably, and I have no idea what she's going to do. She's going to take the first part of our presentation.
One day, Dr. De Laguna died. Alaska Anthropology Association had a session on Dr. De Laguna, which was organized by Rachel Mason, and I introduced her briefly when I did that TEK on fisheries yesterday. She was the author with me on that TEK on fisheries. She did the contemporary management of fisheries. And she was asking for someone to be part of this panel on Dr. De Laguna from Yakutat in honoring Dr. De Laguna. And at that time, there's no funding for me to travel at the tribal level, so I couldn't attend. But after it, she had requested that if anyone had anything they wanted to contribute, they were doing a journal for her, in honor of her, with the Arctic anthropology. And so I tied my mom down and I begged her to do something. And so we did put this paper together in honor of Dr. De Laguna. And this is the latest issue of the Arctic Anthropology. So if you want to request it, this article is in the latest issue of Arctic Anthropology. And I guess she really liked the journal, and so it's the first story or the first part of this on here. What I wanted to do is show you a few slides of when Dr. De Laguna came to Yakutat, and this is the potlatch that my mom will be talking about in the paper that she wrote. But briefly, this is Dr. De Laguna. And I don't know if you've all heard about the 3 volumes she wrote on Yakutat. Are you guys all familiar with Under Mount St. Elias? Have you guys heard about that? It's a huge 3-volume set for the Smithsonian Institution. And she recorded a lot of the songs, and they're all on tape, and we're working on transferring them onto disc right now. So she did a lot of tremendous work in the Yakutat area, and documented a lot of the songs, and they're transcribed, and a lot of them were originally on reel-to-reel, and now they're being transferred to CDs. I think at this time I'll probably turn them over, this part of the presentation over to my mom. This mic's not working, I don't think.
I've got a loud voice. This is my mother, Susie Abraham. And this is, I call her Grandma. This is Dr. Laguna here. This is my cousin, Buddie Bremner, who led, with Harry Bremner, did a lot of that Tlingit dancing in the early days when Yakutat got started in the 50s. And this was the 2nd generation. We're on the 4th generation. So this is my cousin, Buddie Bremner. His father was my uncle, Susie's brother. So when I was quoting the history of Russian Ford, I was actually quoting his father. In the olden days, those were the matches of nobility, where you married your first cousins. So they always teased us a lot. We're ravens and they're Gatyakagwantan. Who else is there? Is this Harvey Melton?
Yeah.
Yeah, this one here is Harvey Melton. He's Yakutat people call it Kwashkakon. I call Kwashkakon a bought a tool. We got a river that was Hummack Creek. And she was the head of that house there. They're all gone. They're all gone. They're in a spirit world.
We'll just briefly, there's only a few slides of Dr. De Laguna, and then so that what happened is since my mom's been in Anchorage for like 4 months, she hasn't seen any of this. But I did pull a few slides from the potlatch where Dr. De Laguna showed her, sang her song at her potlatch. So this is, yeah, just go ahead. And then you can go back and forth if you need it. These are just a few slides of her at the potlatch thing. Since she hasn't seen this part. Go ahead. Let's go to the others again. So
But you go back to that last one. And let me talk a little bit about this. When Dr. Laguna first came to Yakutat, I was in Ganado, Arizona. I was a public health nurse on the Navajo reservation. So I didn't get to meet her when she first came. But after, and we argued a lot. And she used to call me snotty. She was with the older people all the time when I came home. And some of her translations I did not agree with. You know, when you're 22 years old, you think you're smart. And I came from the Navajo reservation as a public health nurse. And she would be there in her, what I call, army trousers. I don't know if you know in the olden days, I called it British trousers. It comes like this and then it goes like this. And I used to make fun of her. And I didn't know her. I was really out of line because they had already adopted her. But what the arguments we had, even at 22, was that areas where translations were not read back to the person who told it. She didn't have the time to do that. So there was, it's amazing, her inaccuracies were very few. Very, very few. And this picture is when she was as old as I was when I was a painter her. She was 22 years old and she was already into her PhD degree when she was working in overseas. She fell in love with this young man that she had gone to college with. All these years they had this love things going back and forth while she was paddling canoes and kayaks all over the world studying people. She was just awesome lady. They eventually broke up and it broke her heart for years. It broke her heart. And when she showed us this, she showed me this picture, she said to me, I was 22 years old once upon a time, and I was in love too. So this is when she was 22 years old and she was in love. I love that picture. After I came back to Yakutat, she was on her last year there. She was finishing up the 3 volumes. Have you read them, Marie? She was writing up the conclusions of the 3 volumes, and she was picking out more songs that she had to wasn't sure of. And in the old Yakutat, they've changed it quite a bit. In the old Yakutat, my father's house was, the community was laid out in a traditional kind of way. My father's house was here, the church was down here, the MB home was here, my uncle Herod Bremner's house was here, Charlie White's house was here. You know, that's how they laid out their communities, houses. My father and his brother-in-laws, you know, surrounded that area. And she rented a house right in back of my father's house. That was her last year. We packed water those days, and electricity went out at 10 o'clock. So she had to live like us. She had to pack water. Her mother came too, who was a very intelligent person, and McClellan was there with her. They packed water, they packed oil, you know, because you have these oil tanks. And they were to see my father chopping wood as they went about by their chores. Spent a lot of time at that time with my father. She recorded my father's love songs. I'm going to make my father over there learn them. It's Te Freddie love songs to my mother, his wife. And she recorded that, she liked it, and she would come down to my mom and dad's house all the time to just listen to my father sing. And one day she asked, how do you compose your songs? The olden ways that my father told her was, and that includes Lorraine's people here. One of the best song composers was Sam George. And Sam George was married to Annie George, which is Lorraine's relative. But Annie George was the daughter of one of the twin ladies that was my father's oldest brother's daughter. She's shaking her head and then she tells me, write it. But that was the olden ways of how we were related. But Sam George told them once, and we're going back to interactions to maybe 1880, 1890, the interactions of those people. Sam George said he made a charm. It was like a rattle. And when you wanted to compose a song, you put it under your pillow and you wished on a tune and words. And De Laguna did that for days and days and days. Nothing came to her. So she went back to my father again, and she went to John Ellis, who lived next door to my father also, Kagwantan. Sitka Kagwantan man. And she told him, this is the words that's in my heart. And she spoke Tlingit. And she sort of sang and hummed it to John Ellis, and they wrote it down. And then she came back to my father, and she told my father, this is sort of kind of the tune I've got in my heart. I'm not sure what my father said to her because she left again, and I didn't hear any more of this. But one day, the birds came back, like this time of the month, March, April. All the little birds started coming back, and they would all gather between Dr. Laguna's house and my father's house. And if you listen to birds, they've got wonderful songs for you. And there was one that she really loved to listen to. And that was where she started. And what I'm going to do right now is turn it over to Judy, because I will go on and on and on, but if she's got a paper, she can read it because it's shrunk to 10 minutes. Otherwise, we'll be here all day. And you can start where...
I can play the song.
Oh, okay.
This is the song that she composed, which is off the tapes here.
You have to remember, this is in the 50s, so those tape recorders are huge things, and the mics are huge, and she would run out to the porch. There would still be snow around, and she would sit there like this with the mic trying to get the birds to sing for her. And one of the ones she really liked is, and I will get to it in a little while. And my father would be chopping wood, and my father was known as a very stern-looking man. You know, when he walked into a room, the place went quiet. There was not a drop of pin you could hear. And my mother used to look out the window just to see my father grinning, trying to hold back his laugh as De Laguna ran around there with her mic out on a porch. But this is her song, and it's a combination of a Yek song and a song to honor the Nakati Yeti. My father was a Nakati Yeti. And she says, and this is really appropriate that I did this. I usually just won't do it, but they asked us to do it right after she died. Because by that time, I had so much respect for this lady. She captured a lot of things that a lot of us don't capture. She captured the life of the way you live in the spirit world and the way you warm your relatives that are still here. She captured all of it. So that part will take you to the Yek world, to the spirit world. Her love song is a clan love song. So she combined these. She said to the people of Yakutat, song for Kinechon and Saknachati. When I go out into space, into the vast uniform, there will be longing for you from the spirit world. You, Kinechon children, my love for you will kill me. To Yakutat, I again will come. I was trying to talk to my students on this one little word. To Yakutat, again I will come. You have to go back to when I go out into space to understand that one little verse. That means her spirit is coming back to Yakutat. If I dream of my wolf, my father's, if any of you have been at SJ, my father's regalia has wolves on it. And George and Judy showed a slide of my father in his regalia. That's one of my father's crests. I would be so happy, dear wolf. Oh, the Knachati children. As if the sun was shining, your raven will be happy in the spirit world. And this is the short version, very short version of it. But I will let Judy get into the bird story. And I don't know if she's got pictures of it. So that is how she composed it. And I'm 78, and at that age you do what you want to do. So it takes a lot of 20 phone calls, 300 emails to Judy to get me to do something. But I really wanted to do this when the call came because I was still grieving for my grandmother. Kitty Isaac gave her that name. She's Kinechon. And Lorraine's first husband was many of her translators. He translated a lot of what my father said. Lorraine's first husband, Sheldon James Jr., was my father's only sister's nephew. And Kitty Isaac was, here I go again, Judy. Kitty Isaac was born in Catella on that Copper River area where we come from. She was about 100, 130, 140 years old when Dr. Laguna was working with her. And there was an instant, what is it they say, kindred spirits with that old lady and this young anthropologist. And she gave her name to Dr. Laguna right away. She is Sheldon James Jr., Sheldon James Sr., Sheldon James's mother, Annie James. Annie James, his mother's name. It's about 6 generations where it finally came to Dr. Laguna. It comes from the moon house. And it took me a long time to appreciate this very, very fantastic lady. And we still talk to her. She used to call me on a telephone to scold me from Washington or wherever she was at. But I'll let Judy get into a little bit of those things.
Well, the paper is very short, but the part that she wanted me to talk about was Freddie's favorite bird song. It's the song was composed after the Golden Crown Sparrow song. That's what it was. The tune to the song she composed was inspired by this bird, Shakaditina. Shakadatina, the golden crown sparrow song, and I won't attempt to say the scientific name. It's pretty hard. Although she identified more than a dozen Yakutat songbirds, she adored what she referred as the most beautiful sparrow with a golden crown and a black stripes on the side of the crown. Most of all, she enjoyed their song. So this is basically most of what she does. We talk a little bit about her, how she got her name on there, and the various times that we met with her. One of the things that we mentioned was when she came to Celebration, about the time she went to the Potlatch. Mentioned briefly about the time that my brother David visited her, and she always was recognized us, and she always was happy to see the grandchildren of Olaf and Susie Abraham. Also wanted to give credit to Kai. He took this beautiful Mount St. Elias picture. So
One of the reasons that we do this as a family is because of what we're doing today, to share with you the knowledge of our ancestors. I give honor and complete credit to my father, my mother, all the ancestors that taught us in Yakutat, for them to take the time. And this generations are now, I don't know what generation I am at 78 from that. And then there is the generation of my children, there's the generation of their children, and more generations to come. Hopefully each of you will take home something as a gift at what you heard today. You might want to talk about that crazy short lady that you saw, but it's a gift to you. We are a gift to you to take home, to share with your loved ones. I'm sure my father over there will give a great big hug to his wife and say, my crazy mother was up there and wouldn't shut up. But I learned something. And I'm hoping that you will learn something, you will ask us questions, and we will share whatever knowledge that any of us got. My daughter's back there, she's Executive Director of AARP, my granddaughter's out there, playing a little bit with civil engineering, a little bit with business, a little bit with finance. She is a Yakutat Huna person, and I don't want to leave here without giving condolences today to Nevada. Her dad, Richard Williams, is on the way from Anchorage to bring his sister's ashes from Anchorage, which is Nirvana's auntie. So when she died, when we were coming down in Anchorage. But life is what we're about now. traditional way, we should not come. Traditional way, we should grieve at home and practice all the taboos and the protocols. But because we feel like in order for the Tlingit nation to survive and grow, our job is to give you what we've got and bury our grief for a while. We're going to meet the ashes at 11 o'clock today. Judy's always good with questions. So if there's any questions at all, please feel free, and we've got lots of time for change. Thank you for coming.
Are there any questions or?
Hi. You're Maria? Yes, Maria and Jim. I'm Clarissa. Years ago, I had the privilege and honor to have song and dance instruction with Harry K. Bremner Sr. back in the early 70s, 72, 73, 74. And he passed away on March 19th, 1976, within 2 hours of my grandmother passing away. And my brother saw him dance up there in Fairbanks at the festival. And my Aunt Catherine Mills from Huna, the Mount Fairweather dancers, were going to dance after him. And I got the story that he would, yes, and he just dropped. But
I was backstage,
yes.
yeah, and part of the problem was the elevator was broken at the dorms where he was staying, and I don't remember how many floors up he was, and I think that aggravated. But when he was dancing, he did walk off and die and stagger up and die.
Yeah.
Dancing.
My brother saw that because he was sitting in line of sight of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to say, since the Yakutat people are here, that Harry Bremner was an amazing man. I went to visit him for a week in April of 1975. I brought my boyfriend then to meet where this man came from. My boyfriend is still my husband now. And we spent that week with him at Becky Bremner's house. He was building a house. He was a mandolin player. He was working on a boat.
He's a tailor too.
He was a tailor. He showed me how to sew. He said, and this is interesting because he was one of my main inspirations for making regalia.
He was fantastic.
Fantastic designer. And
really an excellent carpenter.
Excellent carpenter. He was my kind of man. Yeah. Really. And I kind of have a man like that, multi-talented. He's a musician, a woodworker, a writer, an editor, an artist. He's everything. He can do just about anything and everything. But one of the things that he taught me was how to sew. And he had us make our own tunics. I still have those tunics. 4 of them. My mom brought them out last summer, and she showed them to me. What am I going to do with these? I looked at those. Oh, they're so little. We were little then. And there was 4 of them because he had chosen 4 of us to go with him and with the Yakutat dancers, Mount St. Elias dancers, to tour Southeast Alaska. And I know that he stepped outside of his traditional boundaries, and he came to Juneau and he taught people there the song and dance. then he said that he was all excited because you guys were coming down for us to join and meet. And then we went to Metlakatla. I haven't been to Metlakatla since. Anyways, he taught me how to sew. Don't have your thread. And I've made 50 button robes. I have made 50 button robes. I've made 5 hand-woven chokat and ravenstail robes. But every time I go to sewing, thread up my needle, 30 some odd years now, 32, 31 years, I have sewn with him in mind. Every time I thread up the needles, because he said, do not make your thread longer than your arm's length. Holy moly. I said, what? He goes, #1 lesson.
And it doesn't tangle.
It doesn't tangle. And all these years, since my first tunics in 1973. And what I wanted to say was, I wanted to thank you guys for being who you are. I have yet to come back to you.
I would like to add a little more on that. Frederica de Laguna was trained by profession as a tailor. He left Yakutat to go down south to learn seamstress and made his own regalia and made pretty much his own family's regalia. And by trait, by cultural traditional trait, he was a dancer. He was not a drummer or a singer. But all the other elders, singers, and drummers had passed away. And I was fortunate to be under his scrutiny training. His scrutiny training. Hours of dancing and walking through the mountain. It's the old sound of walking through the mountain, getting jump back and forth. Just go and see your sweetheart walking through the mountains. And we were training, and we got invited to go to the World Expo in Seattle. In Spokane. World Expo in Spokane, I think in 1974. And he kept, every time we go to 2 hours of practice, once or twice a week, he says, I'm not a singer and I'm not a drummer, but I do the best I can. But he did a real good job. But when we went to the World Expo in Spokane, you see some of the old traditional regalias with heavy 70 to 100% wool, with all the beadwork and heavy work on it, 10 to 15 pounds or more. We're dancing in 85 degrees in Spokane, Washington for the World Expo for a week. But that's what the old dance group, like my father was talking about when they started in 1955. There are specific drummers, there are specific singers, and there are specific dancers. And he was just a dancer, but he learned by memories, by tattooed implant in his brain, the singing and the drumming, so he can pass it on to the next generation.
What is your name?
I'm David Ramos, the youngest one.
He's the youngest son.
Oh,
He's the youngest son.
I think it's really important to acknowledge those people that have really dedicated their lives to teaching music and dance and language. And we have Ida here from Carcross, Teslin, and she has 78 now. She's been teaching Tlingit language and music and dance to the Carcross Tagish First Nations dancers. We have George Ramos, and I must mention to George, Mr. Ramos, there was a tape done at Kooeex night, I think it was 1991, they did a really nice documentary. It was produced by the Alaska State Arts Council and I worked for them, and I used that tape, and it features the dance group from Yakutat, wonderful introduction and interview with Mr. Ramos. He's speaking Tlingit, and I show it to my classes at University of New Mexico almost every semester, so you're also teaching my students. Your teachings go very far. So I don't know if we have any other language or dance teachers here at all, but I want to acknowledge and maybe take this moment to thank you because
Your Maureen's a language teacher.
oh, okay, yes, thank you. And this is such dedication because oftentimes you're not a millionaire. You're not being paid. This is just love of culture, love of the youth that are learning. So maybe we should have the teachers stand.
Yes.
Stand, teachers. You're keeping our culture alive.
Well, thank you, Gunos Chis, everybody for coming this morning. It was a really lovely morning and I learned a lot. Thank you.